Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk About It.
We are moving right along and on time, and now I'd like to bring up our District 23 state legislators, Senator Ron Watson, Delegates Marvin Holmes, and Kim Taylor.
I was really surprised to be appointed to the House Judiciary Committee. Why do you put Kim Taylor on the House Judiciary Committee? Where we work on bills that deal with civil law, family law, juvenile law, and those laws dealing with public safety. But after 90 days of being on that particular committee, I actually found that my life's experiences as a wife, a mother, as a baby boomer, has really prepared me well for the tough times and tough issues that we dealt with in the Judiciary Committee. I also serve on the Legislative Review Committee for the Black Caucus and the Education Committee for the Prince George's County delegation. So as a freshman delegate, I really tried not to take on too much. But I was the primary sponsor for 4 bills, and I co-sponsored 52. Some of you are familiar with my work as one of the founders of the Fair and Unbiased Appraisal Advocates, a group we call FUA. And actually, Boyd is here, and he's actually a member as well. I don't see him anymore, but yes, Boyd, wherever you are. But the background for that work focuses on research that was completed by the Brookings Institute some years ago. And some of you may have seen some of the documentaries on appraisal bias. Well, based on their research on biased housing policy and practices, the Brookings Institute developed a suite of legislation that they actually shot across the country. And I took on 2 of those bill recommendations. One required the Department of Housing and Community Development to complete an annual racial equity impact assessment. Now that bill did stall in my colleague Marvin's committee. That's okay. The other bill attempted to put safeguards in place for those home buyers who chose land installment contracts to purchase a property, mostly because they can't qualify for a mortgage, a typical mortgage. Now that bill got out of the House, but it stalled in the Senate. But they're both really important bills, and I'll bring them both back next year. So I did get one bill through, and that was access to counsel in evictions. That's a funding bill. And that bill ensured that those who are below a certain income threshold would continue to have access to counsel if they were being convicted. So my bill asked for indefinite funding for these services. The Senate modified my bill and asked that the funding be through 2025, so just a couple of years. Well, that version passed, but it's still a win, right? Some of my co-sponsored bills passed, like the Child Victims Act of 2023, which removes the statute of limitations for child sexual abuse. In the Judiciary Committee, we heard about 8 hours of testimony from adults who had been molested as children and from parents whose children had been sexually assaulted. That was a really tough day in judiciary. It was long and it was mentally and physically challenging. And these same victims items had been back to the Judiciary Committee and the General Assembly for many, many years before we finally passed the bill this year. So I'm going to clap on that one because it was very important that we finally passed that important legislation. Another bill that I co-sponsored was House Bill 226, which prohibits a person in a position of authority to engage in a sexual act with a minor. Now, you would have thought that that was already law, right? Well, that bill passed both houses and was eventually signed by the governor, so that's good news. I was also happy to co-sponsor House Bill 1191, which creates a task force to prevent and counter elder abuse. And that bill also was approved and signed by the governor. And by the way, you'll find, if you want a copy of my end-of-session letter, those bills and many, many others are described in the end-of-session letter. So I have a few on this table. But really, and I'm going to end so my colleagues can go on. One of the things that I was looking forward to as a new legislator, as a new representative of our community, was to grant scholarships to our District 23 residents, to our District 23 college students and college-bound students. So this year, our office received 100 applications. We actually got over 100 applications, and we have dozens on the waiting list, waiting just in case some money frees up. And at this point, I really would like to acknowledge my Chief of Staff, Kathleen Geary, who, as legislators, we know that our chiefs of staffs, our legislative aides, take on a lot of our day-to-day work and support us greatly. And she's the one that reached out to these students, made sure that their applications were complete. Our kids don't always follow directions. So she interfaced with these students, and then she led our scholarship committee that we put together, and that scholarship committee met about 6 weeks ago, and our committee was able to award over $50,000 in scholarships to kids in our district. And actually, some of our scholarship committee members are here today. If you're here, can you raise your hand? Or there, thank you. Thank you to our scholarship committee. You guys are great. And really, that's it for me. It's as usual. I want to let you know that it's really my pleasure to represent you. And thank you, Councilmember Watson, for the invitation. I appreciate you, and thank you, guys.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Marvin Holmes, and I am also a state delegate. And I have been a state delegate for this jurisdiction for 21 years. One of the things that I am now, I've been opportunity to serve as from the Speaker of the House is I am chair of the Housing and Real Property Subcommittee. In that role as chair of Housing and Real Property Subcommittee, I am responsible for the Maryland Condominium Act, the HOA Act, the Cooperative Act. I'm responsible for foreclosures. Kim talked about appraisal. I'll get to that in a minute. Ground rents, most of you don't know what ground rents are, but when ground rents come up in a discussion, I start my discussion by saying, in the summer of 1634, King Charles I said, you could build your castle on our land. I own land, you own the castle. Well, that's ground rent. Don't worry about it. It's mostly in Bowie area. I'm sorry, Baltimore area. I'm also responsible for community associations, etc. And to that end, I also coordinate a lot with some of our federal partners. We had some discussion about rental assistance. I was at Capitol Hill a couple of weeks ago, talking with some of our senators and congressmen there. And one of the things I was asking for is some some more voucher assistance from the federal government. Vouchers, I think, are a necessary part of rental assistance and affordable housing, but we need to have these funds coming from the federal government because we, at the state level, don't have those kind of funds that they do. I also had some discussions here earlier about the lack of housing in this area, in the whole state, actually. There is some legislation at the federal level talking about taking some of these vacant warehouse spaces and turning them into residential units. Those conversations are being held both at the federal government and at DHCD, the State Department of Housing and Community Development, which is here in Prince George's County. Another sidebar here, when I first got into office, Prince George's County had no state agencies. I put legislation together, and with the assistance of then Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown, now Prince George's County does have a state agency, which is the Department of Housing and Community Development. Prior to that, we had no state agencies in Prince George's County. We do now have one. There was some discussion earlier about the 210 corridor, and I want to give some information there, which is not in our district, but I want to give some information. I'm also on the Environment and Transportation Committee. During this last session, we had some increase in speeding on that 210 corridor. We allowed and increased the number of mobile cameras on Route 210. But I put an amendment into that bill about the mobile cameras so that the funds from the speed cameras went to the redesign of Route 210 so that we can finally figure out what it is that is allowing these people to go 90, 100, 115 miles an hour down 210. So the funding for those cameras goes to the redesign of Route 210. The other thing I want to talk about, as I indicated, is reference to housing. I see some members here who are in different HOAs and condominiums, etc. This year I sponsored 20 some odd bills, I think, and only because I am chair of Housing and Real Property, most of the legislation that I have proposed is relevant to housing and housing issues. I'm very proud to have worked with Kim and FUA, and in one of those pieces of legislation that got passed this year was about appraisal bias. And when I gave my presentation on my piece of legislation, I had a newspaper clipping from the Washington Post. And on the front page of the business section of the Washington Post was a picture of Kim Taylor. And I let that picture out so that the Senate members could see a photo of Kim Taylor on the front page of the Washington Post in terms of my appraisal bias bill. What I had done in this appraisal bias bill, there are 3 levels of appraisers. The lowest level requires a lot of education and some supervision, 1,000 hours of supervision to become an appraiser. My youngest daughter has a bachelor's degree in architecture and a master's degree in engineering. She wanted to be an appraiser, could not find someone to supervise her to be an appraiser. I don't know if they looked at her bachelor's degree from Hampton University or if they didn't have the time. I don't know which one it was, but I knew something had to change. The law that we got passed is that now that 1,000 hours of supervision can now be done at the education level. I've been in contact with Bowie State University, Morgan State, and the university out on the Eastern Shore. I'm trying to make sure that they get first dibs at this education process to get appraisers into the business. In the state of Maryland right now, minority appraisers make up 4% of the appraisers in the entire state of Maryland. There was an article in the Baltimore Sun relevant to a university professor at Johns Hopkins just 2 years ago. He got an appraisal done for his home. The first appraisal came in about $360,000, and after he removed photos, etc., on the walls, the second appraisal came in at a little bit over $710,000. There are a lot of things relevant to housing that I'm still advocating for. Some of you live in HOAs and condominiums, etc. And one of the things that I see that is lacking is that your community manager, who represents and oversees sometimes your HOA and condo, etc., they're not licensed. I think they should be licensed. There are multiple cases at the Attorney General's office now where community managers have absconded with millions, plural, of HOA condominium funds and have gone overseas, and the money is never again to be seen. HOAs managers, I think, in my opinion, need to be licensed. When I present this bill to the committee, I start my testimony thusly. In order to be a community manager in the state of Maryland, you need one thing. You need to go to Staples and get a business card that says you're a community manager. That's it. No training, no update on training, etc. So I'm still going to be pushing for that bill. I'm going to say one more thing, and then I'll sit down and let the senator take over. This year we had not a record number of freshman delegates, but quite a few, I think 40 some odd state delegates. Every time we have an influx of new state representatives, I take a few of them under my wing, and then to teach them how the process works. As indicated earlier, I had 20 some odd bills that I had crafted. One of the new state delegates from Baltimore County walked up to me and asked me for some tutelage. I took one of my bills and walked her to the clerk's office, struck my name from the top of the bill, put her name on the bill, and then helped her understand this process. The bill that I had for her to walk through the process was, currently, all the new laws relevant to HOAs, condos, etc., you don't know what those new laws are. It's very difficult to find out what those new laws are. So the bill that she and I put together now says that DHCD must every year post on their website all of the new laws that have come about from the previous General Assembly session on June 1st of every year. That has never happened before, but we did get that bill passed.
Losing the fear of looking foolish comes with age. Losing your way in your own home doesn't. Learn the warning signs of Alzheimer's. Some things come with age, some others don't.
Bowie is very, very strong. Very, very strong. Some of you remember how many businesses went north on the other side of 450 when Whitechapel opened up. But we have over $2 billion worth of investments going on right now in Bowie. In our district, we have Amber Ridge, 19 acres, 187 units. We have Milk Branch Crossing, 800,000 square feet, 408 apartments, 190 townhouses. We have South Lake, 600,000 square feet of commercial space, 381 acres of mixed use. And within South Lake, so far, we have Chase, McDonald's, Panda Express, Sheetz, Carolina Kitchen, a salon, a gym, a Panera Bread, a Residence Inn, PJ's Coffee, Tropical Smoothie Cafe, Home Suites by Hilton, a Giant, and the list goes on and on. So those things are going to be happening, and hopefully we can start spending money back in our own community, which is what we need to do. I have the pleasure of sitting on the Education, Energy, and Environment Committee in the Senate. I'm also been appointed by the Senate President to sit on the Cyber, IT, and Biotech Committee. And just 2 days ago, I was asked to sit on the MHEC Oversight Committee. That's the Maryland Higher Education Committee. And the reason we did that is because Senate President realized I'm a graduate of Morgan State. That's right, MSU is in the house. But several years ago, you know, there was a lawsuit worth $577 million for program duplication that white universities were doing against our HBCUs. And after several years, our HBCUs won. And if you've been paying attention to the news the other day, Towson State University is trying to put a program in place that's duplicative of what Morgan State University already has. And so literally while I was on the phone call with my president, President David Wilson from Morgan State University, I got a call from the Senate President who said, I need you on this committee. And our job is to put a process in place where we can ensure there are no more duplications of programs. And we have to get that done before November is out. Let me talk about the bad. We recreationalize cannabis, y'all. Now, I don't see anybody in here jumping up and down all excited, but we have some very important challenges. And let me tell you one of the things we had to do when we recreationalized cannabis. We took a very valuable tool from our law enforcement officers, because our law enforcement officers pick up over half of the unlicensed firearms off the street because of the smell of cannabis. And so now if we recreationalize and make legal cannabis, we can no longer have our folks being profiled. You can't have it both ways. So you understand how hard that vote was. But in doing that, we took a very, very valuable tool away from our law enforcement officers. And they talked about the proliferation of unlicensed firearms. They continue to make our way into the community. And we have to stand up and really do something about it, but be really thoughtful of how we're going to address this issue. I was glad that the Prince George's County Council met with our new superintendent of schools. I'm meeting him tomorrow. I actually had a bill that was going to require a magnetometer in every one of our schools, because more guns are making their way through our classrooms than you hear about. And the teachers call me and let me know. And I'm glad to see that Superintendent House is already thinking in that direction. And you heard our school board members before talk about security measures that are being considered. Now let me get into the bad. The ugly, I'm sorry. And it's real ugly. You know who kept me straight right there is my legislative director, Trey Hayes. Give him a hand, please. Trey keeps me straight. He's responsible for, you know, playing catcher of all these ideas for bills and then helping me come up with appropriate response as we determine what bills we want to sponsor and what bills we don't. But the ugly, let me put it like this. Ask yourself, if we're all in the same community, and you look at what's going on in our schools, the disrespect, the poor performance, the increase in carjackings, the crime, the retail thefts, what subset of people are we talking about? Now, I won't answer that, but you already know who I'm talking about. We have a systemic problem in our community. The black community is what I'm talking about. And nobody wants to talk about it because now we have to point the finger inward. But we have a challenge of our time, District 4. We have to come together and fix this issue. We have the highest rate of divorces, the highest number of single-parent families, the highest number of cases in fraternity court, and our fathers are missing in action, and there's very little respect for men. And we have to turn this around because our kids are the ones that are suffering. Now let me tell you this. What I've been doing is meeting with our sheriff, superintendent of schools, county exec, state's attorneys, to try to figure out what is going on with this crime and why does it seem to be so unique and pronounced in the black community. And it comes down to families. It comes down to the destruction of the black family. It's been systemic, and we need to recognize for what it is. There is a definition, if I can find it. Because once I learned about it, I said, wow, we had to really create something for that. It's called sins. child in need of supervision. And let me give you the definition of this. What is a child in need of supervision? A child who needs guidance, treatment, or rehabilitation and falls under one of these categories. Must legally go to school but routinely does not. Regularly cannot be controlled by the child's parents, guardians, or custodians. Let me repeat that. Regularly cannot be controlled by the child's parents, guardians, or custodians. Now, our police force didn't tell you, but you know, we still have a curfew in place. And when they've taken these kids back, the parents said, I don't know why you're bringing them back here, because they're going to do what they want to do. Folks, and I've said this before, fear of the police, fear of giving my parents bad news, and the fear of God is what kept us together when we were young. Our church has lost the moral ground. I get more calls about solar panels and solar farms and building new buildings and all of these things. But what has happened to having that moral ground? The respect for parents is gone. It is gone. And we systemically, unfortunately, we try to do the right thing, but we've taken a lot of the tools away from law enforcement. Now we have to go back and figure out what we did wrong. What I have here in front of me is the Juvenile Justice Reform Legislation Implementation Manual. I've been meeting with judges, state's attorneys from across the state to figure out what changed and why things have gotten so bad so fast. And because it's so bad, folks ask me, how come we can't get a Harris Teeter? Why are these stores closing? You know, where are our amenities? Well, where the hell you think? Right? This is what we have to fix, and nobody is going to do it for us. And unfortunately, there is no legislation that I can put in place to fix a problem that we have to fix and come together. This is our calling at this time. And the thing that we most fear, and you won't hear anybody talk about it, we put $3.8 billion in our school budget. It's called the blueprint. And if we don't see the results, what are we going to be able to say to ourselves and our families, and our kids and our community? I'm convinced the issue is about fixing families, finding a way to bring families back together, recognizing there is value in a man and a woman raising their child. Grandma needs to be a part of that as well. Thank you. And so I've had this conversation, and it's a hard conversation to have. Not everybody can stand up here and say this. They have to look like me, because I've lived it. I've come from a broken home. But my parents found a way to come back together because they felt I was important, and they decided to make that sacrifice. Now, sitting in the back is a good friend of mine. His name's Christopher Dews. He's worked with me for 2 years, and we're going to do it again to pass a child support bill. I think it makes no sense for someone who falls in arrears in child support and has their means of getting to work taken away. We've tried, this is going to be our 3rd year trying to do this, and we're going to get this thing to happen. We have another bill, a paternity bill. The bill costs no money to the state and simply says at the moment of childbirth, the presumed father is offered a paternity test. And I presented that bill, and they looked at me like I had 2 heads. And I said to you all, and I said to them, if you think it's okay for black families to be exploited on Ricky Lake and Jenny Jones and have a black mother with 3 different fathers and don't know who the heck the father is, if you think it's okay for a child to look up and say, oh, that's when I found out who my daddy was, that is blatant disrespect to our race. And we have to do something about it. And I'm going to put that bill in place, and I'm going to need you to come testify.
Let's Talk About It is here to communicate, educate, motivate, uplift, and inspire people all over the world. See you next time. Let's talk about it.